We begin with rising tensions between Washington and Tehran. The US president has threatened to intervene against a crackdown on growing anti-government demonstrations across Iran. In a misspelt social media post, Donald Trump warned if Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the United States of America will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go. Well, the Iranian regime hit back with the Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Mohammad Bagher Khalibaf, a warning that any US intervention would make American military bases in the region legitimate targets. Meanwhile, opponents of the Iranian government have been staging the biggest demonstrations for 3 years.
As protests enter their 6th day, they are only getting more violent. Groups of angry Iranians are taking to the streets, breaking into government buildings, setting cars alight and voicing their frustration. With inflation estimated to have increased by more than 40%, daily life is becoming unaffordable for many. The currency has also hit a record low, worth 1.4 million rials to a single US dollar on the open market, compared to just over 800,000 a year ago. The dire economic situation drove the start of the protests when shopkeepers in Tehran closed their stores in protest last Sunday. The movement has quickly snowballed into a broader show of anger against the country's authoritarian government, with some calling for an end to the Islamic regime. In response, Tehran's central bank governor has resigned, and the president has asked his government to listen to the legitimate demands of protesters. The protests are the largest in Iran since 2022, when 22-year-old Mahsa Amini was detained for not wearing a hijab and then died in police custody. But the ongoing unrest isn't as widespread or deadly. Hundreds of people, including dozens of government security forces, were killed during months of demonstrations and the crackdown that followed.
Let's go through this with Alex Vatanka, who's an Iran expert and senior fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. Welcome to DW. This exchange of threats between Donald Trump and Iran's leaders, is this the usual war of words or something more significant?
Good to be with you, Phil. Actually, it's not. It's not the sort of custom, if you will, for American presidents to, certainly not this early on, come in and have such a strong, powerful message for the leaders in Tehran or for the protesters in Iran, as we've seen from President Donald Trump. So this is kind of different. We can sit here and debate what locked and loaded means in practical terms, but at the very least, what he's doing right now is sort of sending a symbolic message both to the protesters and the leadership in Tehran that the United States is watching. But as I said, what that means in practical terms, I guess will very much depend on what happens in Iran in days and weeks to come.
Speculate for us, because this is a president who has said he's not interested in foreign adventures. This is a president who has, many would say, unfinished business in Iran. So how likely is a US intervention?
You know, if this was the Trump administration 1.0, the first term he was in the White House, I would have said he's going to be very careful not to get the United States involved in anything that remotely looks like trying to bring the regime down and therefore bringing the United States into Iran. He's always politically said that's not what he wants to do. We all know he's criticized George W. Bush for his decision to go to Iraq back in 2003. But this Trump administration 2.0 is very different. He has been surprising all of us with some of the things he's done, most recently in Venezuela. And we can even go back to this summer where he brought the United States into the Iran-Israel war, where the United States decided to take those 3 nuclear sites out. Again, that was a surprise. So, we shouldn't discount this president in this second term, where he doesn't need to worry about his re-election, more worried about his political legacy, that he might decide, this Iran issue has been a pain for the United States since he can remember going back to 1979. He wants to be the American president who, as he would put it, bring Iran back to the United States, and he might act accordingly.
What about the response from Iran's leaders? Yesterday we had the President Masoud Pezeshkian telling the Iranian government that we are at fault, you are at fault, do not go after some other person. What does this tell us about what's going on at the top of the Iranian government?
You almost have to pity Masoud Pezeshkian. Here's a man whose title says he's the president, but in reality, he has zero powers to change the sort of policies that would please the protesters, namely strategic foreign policy choices, or the rampant corruption and the many unelected bodies in Iran that sit on power and money. Those are not Pezeshkian's to change. Those decisions lie with Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, who's been very quiet in recent days. So Pezeshkian does what elected officials in the Islamic Republic do. They come out and say to the people, we've heard your voices. But that's really just part of the game. Really, it's the security forces who don't listen to Pezeshkian, but listen to Khamenei, who are involved in the repression. So I don't think anybody in Iran really listens to Pezeshkian. But, I have to say, there's a deep split inside the Iranian regime in terms of the day after the future were to go. And if you start seeing defections from the ranks of the regime, but that would certainly make this round of protests very different from, say, the ones we saw in 2022 with the Mahsa Amini protests.
OK, something to watch out for. Thanks for guiding us through that, Alex. Alex Vatanka from the Middle East Institute. Let's explore this with Kamran Matin, who's an Associate Professor of International Relations at the University of Sussex in the United Kingdom. Welcome to DW. How seriously should the government of Iran take those threats from Donald Trump?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm sure that Iranian leaders take this statement very seriously, especially in the light of the fact that only a few days ago, Netanyahu met Trump, after which Trump indicated very clearly that if it's confirmed that Iran is rebuilding its nuclear and missile projects, they will attack. And now this statement diverges from Trump's announced or at least official position in the trying to avoid engaging in overseas war, and also diverges from what is said in the National Security Strategy document, which was recently released. However, it can be also interpreted as an attempt by Trump to lay the ground for an intervention which is precisely diverging from those previous positions, and therefore allows Trump to justify any potential attack on Iran, even though he had said before that they have completely obliterated Iran's nuclear and missile project. What I'm trying to say is that this time the intervention, Trump justifies it or anticipates it, not in terms of Iran's nuclear and missile project, but in terms of violation of human rights on a large scale inside Iran.
Right, but just to be clear about what you seem to be saying, the violation of people's human rights would be an excuse for the Trump administration to go into Iran to finish a job that it believes and needs finishing.
On this particular case, yes, because Trump has announced time and again that they are no longer trying to, create democracy or build nations across the world. They are not world police and so on. So in the case of Iran, he seems to have suspended this position, which he has adopted from day one of his presidency, actually.
And do you think protesters are likely to welcome this American intervention, given that US sanctions are one of the reasons that the country's economy is in such a shocking state?
If the 12 days war with Israel is anything to go by, we know that when there is an attack and bombs are raining down, it's unlikely that people have the ability to come to the streets. They are trying to basically save their life and property and so on. So I doubt that actually that necessarily helps, unless that the bombing or whatever attack Iran and United States and Israel might launch will specifically and exclusively or mostly targets Iranian law enforcement forces, IRGC bases and paramilitary forces, which are the active elements of repression within Iran. But I think it is more likely that the US and Israel might wait to see how these protests develop and then make a decision. Because, as you know, protests in Tehran have slightly subsided, whereas at the same time protests in southern and southwestern Iran have increased.
And a brief word then about the Iranians' threatened response to hit US military targets in the region.
I mean, there has been talks actually in recent weeks that Iran might launch a preemptive attack on Israel, both to restore its deterrence, which was shattered during the 12-day war, but also because Iran is, genuinely afraid of being attacked by Israel, given the discourse and, signals which coming from Tel Aviv. I mean, if that happens, I think that would be for Israel, in fact, ideal, because then there will be little to do in terms of convincing Trump to join Israel in an attack. And Trump's own statement might partially be an attempt to provoke Iran into such an attack.
Very worrying way to start the new year. Thank you for guiding us through that. Kamran Matin from the University of Sussex.
Thank you.